Trump is leaving the White House in 61 days, not that I'm counting. But what's not going away is the damage done to the country by his all-out war on truth. Now, here to talk about journalism in the age of propaganda is political analyst, New York Times bestselling author, and host of MSNBC's The ReidOut, Joy Reid. Welcome, Joy.
Hey, Larry. So good to see you.
It's so good to see you, as always. I watch you every night on MSNBC. You're always a joy. Hey, I'm doing a play on words here, you know. No, I love it because you're one of those political junkies too, and I could see that when you're doing it, you care so much about what it is. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, because Trump doesn't just lie. He does this thing where he combines boasting and lying. I call it bloasting, you know. And his whole bloasting about masks, I think, is responsible. I'm going to say, this may be overstating it, I'll say a third of all COVID deaths in America, I will blame on Trump's disinformation campaign about masks. What do you think?
No, I think that's 100% true.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, Donald Trump, he and his father both fell in under the spell of the power of positive thinking, that sort of faux church that was all about you never admit that anything has gone wrong.
Yes.
You never admit that you're at fault. You never admit that you've lost. You know, it is sort of a kind of his version of a religion, because he's not a religious guy. But he does kind of remind you of kind of the not so Jesus-y version of a preacher, right? That he's preaching this gospel of everything is fine. Because for him, saying everything was fine was about getting the stock market to stay high.
Right.
Even though he knew and admitted to Bob Woodward that he knew that COVID was both deadly and airborne. And he knew that since January. Lying about crowd size is stupid. Lying about COVID is killing people.
Absolutely.
And he and the governors who follow him like he is their pastor, they're killing people.
Yeah, and it's so pernicious, too, the nature of it. You had someone talking about that story of the nurse who reported on the people who are, as they're dying of COVID, they're in denial of the disease that's killing them. I mean, is this an example of how strong disinformation is, or how crazy MAGA followers are?
It's kind of both, right? Because if you think about MAGA, if you think about Trump, you know, Trumpism, as on one level, it's pure self-interest. You know, for very rich people who want tax cuts and they want, they want things from him, they're not in a cult. They just are using him to get the judges they want and the policies they want. Set them aside. But for a lot of people that are part of MAGA, people, you know, I've interviewed people who are experts in cults, and it is a cult.
Yeah.
In a sense, it's a death cult, because people have expressed a willingness to die for him. And the difference between a cult and a religion is that in a religion such as Christianity, I grew up in the Christian church, you know, Jesus died for us. Religions, you don't have your leader ask you to die for him. But that's what Trump is essentially doing. He's saying, come to my rallies, gather all together without masks on, and risk dying for me, to show that you believe in me, to show that, that what I'm saying is more important than what doctors are saying, that what Dr. Fauci is saying, that what experts, scientists. If you believe in me more than you believe in them, come here and gather together with no masks on and risk dying for me, and maybe actually go ahead and die. Wow. And you've had people literally die for him. And that is the definition of a death cult. And the problem is, if there were people who were discreetly in this death cult and decided they were willing to risk death just to not wear masks because that's freedom. Yeah. Okay. If they weren't in my Target, and they weren't in the Walmart with me, and they weren't in the Safeway, and they weren't breathing on all the food, and their kids weren't in school with my kids, that would be one thing. But these people then become a threat to all of us and to all of our health and to all of our survival.
It really is true. I mean, you were affecting me as you were saying that. And it made me think, I've heard people talk about family members who were never like that. And Trump comes along, and he's got to be touching a chord, that something that was already going on. Like people, when you talk about disaffected people, were people looking for something? Was there something missing in their life and he's providing it for them? Because I honestly don't understand it. You know, it's just a cheap political tricks to me.
I know. And I have a friend, you know, going all the way back, who was, at the time was my best friend, who got caught up in a cult. Yeah. And she's still in it. And nothing that we did, you know, this was one of those cults where the world was going to end. And the day after the world was going to end, I went to her and said, you still here? You all right? And she was still there, but she had an excuse for why the world didn't end. Like nothing could break her, even the reality that the world didn't end, right? Yeah. So I think that, yes, I think there is something that people are missing that Trump provides for them. And if you just look at, you know, places like the Public Religion Research Institute, who've to me done the best studies of Trumpism and Trump followers. Sure. a lot of it is this fear of change, the fear that the country is becoming blacker and browner, that LGBT people have pride of place in institutions like marriage, that you're doing this TV show and not a white guy, that I'm doing my show and not all white men, the way that when they grew up, white men had primacy and pride of place as citizens and as the primary citizens in this country, and everyone else was a secondary citizen, even white women. And that's the way that a lot of people think America is supposed to be. The shock of having so many immigrants who aren't white, so many people in prominent positions, and then having a president who's Black, there's like something that happened in a lot of Americans that they said, we need to take America backward, back to where I felt comfortable, this sort of fake vision they have of the 1950s or even the 1920s, I think for some of them. That's where they want to go back to. And Trump promised he would give that to them. And I think that it triggered something in a lot of people. Yeah, and that's certainly a lane of it. There's another lane, too, that's taken up by the right ideology that is in a slightly different lane, where it's a rejection of leftist values that they feel are anti-God, anti-American, taking us down this road. And they even have a lot of young people who are gobbling that up. And Trump, to them, is not so much a Jesus figure. I think he's probably interchangeable for them, but they're still engaged in the same disinformation campaign. And that's the part that I don't understand. Well, it's funny because I interviewed somebody that was involved in the Trump campaign early on, and I asked him, what is it that attracted you to Trump? And he said, he's a celebrity. Because we never have the celebrities. Your side has Hollywood. Because we never have a celebrity? That's what it was? Our side has Beyonce. we have all the cool people. Right? And they have people who used to be in Charles in Charge in the 80s, and you can't fully remember their name. And that's why when Kanye stepped into the Kanye space, people who claim they hate the culture went crazy. They were so excited. It's like, we got Kanye now. They were so excited, they just want the culture. He literally was Jesus Walks for them, He literally was that, And then, as a journalist, is it tough to cover disinformation or some of the entities in disinformation without feeling like you're amplifying it to a certain degree? And how do you gauge that? 100%. It's really hard. We struggled on our team with what to do with QAnon. Because, we ignored it for a long time, right? Because we didn't want to amplify it and attract more people to it by shining a spotlight on it and explaining what it is. But then you got to the point where Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's a QAnon follower, she then is running for office and then she wins. Then you have to deal with it because now you have this ideology that is just soup to nuts insane. And it's invaded our politics. There are nurses involved in QAnon and people in your normal life and teachers and firefighters and people who are just everyday people who could impact your life. And they believe that Democrats are a child-eating cult that is eating children. Drinking their blood. And locking them up in pizza shops where there isn't even a basement. It's really insane, but people really believe it. I mean, if we're going to eat kids, I'll have them in a donut shop, not a pizza shop. That doesn't even make sense to me. Well, let's just hope for the best, Joy. And it's so great seeing you every night. Keep keeping it 100 for us out there.